Picture this, you're sitting in your office at 4 p.m. on a Tuesday, reviewing quarterly projections, when your director walks in with that look. You know the one, the smug, self-satisfied expression that screams trouble. That was me, Abigail Watson, 5 days ago at Axiom Technologies, about to have my world turned upside down. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as I sat there, surrounded by 3 monitors displaying complex financial models I'd been perfecting for weeks. My coffee had gone cold hours ago, but I was deep in the zone, tracking discrepancies that could save the company millions. That's when Thomas Bradley walked in, his perfectly pressed suit and polished shoes clicking against the linoleum floor with an arrogance that made my skin crawl. "Abigail, we're streamlining the budget meetings for efficiency," Director Thomas Bradley announced, barely making eye contact. His voice carried that particular corporate condescension that makes you want to throw your stapler at someone's head. "Also, you don't add too much value to the meeting and board." The words hit like a slap. 7 years at this company. 7 years of late nights, weekend calls, and saving their financial skin more times than I can count. I thought about all those times I'd caught critical errors at 11 p.m., preventing disasters that would have cost Axiom millions. The time I identified the accounting error that saved us from an SEC investigation. The quarterly reports that earned us investor confidence because of my meticulous analysis. But apparently, none of that mattered to Thomas. I just nodded and left his office, my face burning with humiliation. As I walked back to my cubicle, yes, a cubicle, while Thomas sat in his corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows, I felt the eyes of my colleagues on me. Word travels fast in corporate environments, and I could already sense the whispers beginning. Now, before I tell you what happened next, and trust me, what happened next will surprise you, let me paint you a picture of where I was mentally. Have you ever felt completely invisible at work? Like your expertise doesn't matter? That's exactly where I was, questioning everything about my career, wondering if 7 years of dedication meant absolutely nothing. Here's the thing about being a senior financial analyst at a tech company, you see everything. Every expense, every projection, every red flag that's about to become a financial nightmare. And Axiom Technologies? They were heading straight for one. Multiple ones, actually, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you about Axiom Technologies for a moment. Founded in 2018, we specialize in cloud-based solutions for mid-sized businesses. Sounds boring, right? Wrong. We're talking about a company that processes over $50 million in annual revenue, with clients ranging from healthcare startups to manufacturing giants. The kind of company where a single miscalculation can tank stock prices and destroy careers overnight. My role? I was the person who made sure those miscalculations never happened. At least, I was until Thomas decided I was deadweight. Day 1 after the meeting exclusion, I caught wind of something troubling while grabbing my usual morning coffee from the break room. Jake Morrison, wait, I can't use Morrison. Let me call him Jake Thompson, from procurement was on the phone, practically shouting about contract details. The new cloud infrastructure contract with Cloud Tech Solutions, the one they were so excited about, had hidden escalation clauses that would triple costs in month 6. I'd been tracking this for weeks, buried deep in the 247-page contract that apparently no one else had bothered to read completely. Page 156, subsection 4.7.2, to be exact. It stated that after the initial 6-month period, pricing would adjust based on market fluctuations and usage optimization parameters. Corporate speak for, we're going to charge you triple. But suddenly, I wasn't in the room where it happened. The irony of being excluded from the very meeting that would determine whether Axiom would hemorrhage money wasn't lost on me. What would you do? Would you speak up anyway, knowing you'd been deliberately excluded and humiliated? Or would you let them learn the hard way? It's a moral dilemma that kept me up that first night, staring at my bedroom ceiling at 2 a.m., wrestling with my conscience. I chose silence. Not out of spite, well, maybe a little out of spite, but because I realized something profound: sometimes people need to feel the consequences of their decisions. Sometimes the only way to prove your worth is to let others fail without you. Day 2, I watched from my cubicle as the budget team celebrated their streamlined meeting. They approved the infrastructure deal without reading the fine print I would have caught. The conference room erupted in congratulations and back-patting. Thomas even brought in donuts to celebrate their efficient decision-making process. Through the glass walls, I could see him gesturing enthusiastically, probably explaining how much smoother things ran without unnecessary input. The irony wasn't lost on me. They were celebrating their march toward financial disaster with glazed donuts and mediocre coffee. I turned back to my monitors and continued my work, updating the financial models that apparently no one valued. But I also started something new, a detailed analysis of every financial risk I could identify across all departments. Call it insurance for what I knew was coming. Day 3, the first warning signs appeared. Small discrepancies in the monthly burn rate that I would normally flag immediately. Our software licensing costs had jumped 15% without explanation. The marketing department's campaign spending was tracking 23% over budget. Individual issues that seemed minor but would compound into major problems. I drafted 3 separate memos detailing these concerns, then deleted each one without sending. After all, I was just the analyst who didn't add value, right? Instead, I spent my lunch break in my car, updating my LinkedIn profile and researching other companies. TechFlow Industries was hiring senior analysts. Global Tech Solutions had an opening for a financial director position. For the first time in 7 years, I allowed myself to imagine working somewhere else, somewhere my expertise would be valued. Day 4, the domino effect began. Our client retention metrics showed a concerning dip, something I'd been tracking for weeks but hadn't been asked to present. The cloud tech contract had already started showing usage spikes that would trigger those escalation clauses even sooner than I'd predicted. But here's what really got my attention: Thomas started looking stressed. Gone was the smug confidence from earlier in the week. I noticed him staying later, his office lights burning well past normal hours. During my coffee breaks, I'd see him hunched over spreadsheets, his usually perfect hair slightly disheveled. By Thursday evening, I'd started printing my resume on the high-quality paper I kept in my desk drawer for special occasions. Not because I was giving up, but because I was preparing for whatever came next. Sometimes the best defense is a good offense, right? But here's where the story takes a turn that even I didn't see coming. Day 5, 8:43 a.m., I was settling into my morning routine, checking overnight reports, reviewing market indicators, scanning for any red flags that might need immediate attention, when Thomas Bradley burst through my office door like a man possessed. His usually pristine shirt was wrinkled, his hair disheveled, and his face red with panic. "Why didn't you tell me about the shortfall?" he screamed, slamming a financial report on my desk so hard that my coffee mug jumped. The report was covered in red ink and sticky notes, clearly the product of an all-night panic session. I could see the cloud tech contract costs highlighted in angry red circles, with question marks and exclamation points scattered across the margins like a battlefield of confusion. I looked up calmly from my coffee, taking a deliberate sip before responding. "Which shortfall would that be, Thomas?" "The infrastructure costs. They're triple what we budgeted. The board is asking questions I can't answer." His voice cracked slightly on the word answer, and I could see genuine fear in his eyes. "The quarterly review meeting is today, isn't it?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "The one where you present the budget performance to the board of directors?" "Yes. And I have no idea how to explain this." He gestured wildly at the paper scattered across my desk. "The numbers don't make sense. We approved this deal, but somehow the costs are completely different from what we projected. Now, let me pause here and ask you something. How would you have responded? Would you have rubbed it in his face? Reminded him exactly what he'd said about your value to the company? Or taken the high road and helped immediately?" I chose a third option, strategic truth-telling. "Thomas," I said, my voice steady and professional, "I identified those escalation clauses 3 weeks ago. I prepared a full analysis showing the true cost implications, complete with projected quarterly impacts and mitigation strategies. But you streamlined me out of the process, remember? You said I didn't add value." The color drained from his face as the reality hit him. But you should have told me anyway." "Should I have? Let me get this straight, you publicly humiliated me, excluded me from critical meetings, questioned my value to the company, and now you're angry that I didn't volunteer information you deemed worthless?" I stood up slowly, walking to my filing cabinet and pulling out a thick folder labeled Q3 Risk Analysis, Confidential. Inside were 37 pages of detailed financial projections, risk assessments, and mitigation strategies I'd prepared over the past month. All the information that could have prevented this crisis. "This," I said, placing the folder on my desk between us, "is what 7 years of experience looks like. This is what adding value actually means. This is the moment everything shifted. The power dynamic completely flipped, and I realized I held all the cards. Thomas stared at the folder like it was a lifeline thrown to a drowning man. The board meeting is in 2 hours, he whispered, suddenly looking very small in his expensive suit. They're going to ask about budget oversight. About due diligence. About why we missed this. The CEO specifically requested a full financial analysis of all major expenditures. I leaned back in my chair, taking a slow sip of my coffee. The silence stretched between us, filled with the weight of 7 years of underappreciation. Yes, they probably will. Abigail, please. I need your help. We need your help. The words came out barely above a whisper, and for the first time since I'd known him, Thomas Bradley looked genuinely humbled. There it was, the admission I'd been waiting 7 years to hear. But here's what I learned in that moment: revenge isn't about making someone grovel. It's about reclaiming your worth and setting new terms for how you'll be treated moving forward. Thomas, I'll help you fix this. But things are going to change around here. First, I want a formal acknowledgement of my contributions to this company. Second, I want to be included in all future budget meetings. Third, I want my recommendations to be taken seriously, not dismissed out of hand. Over the next hour, I walked him through every financial landmine Axiom was about to step on, and there were several. The infrastructure issue was just the tip of the iceberg. Our software licensing renewal with Dataflow Systems had hidden audit clauses that could cost us millions if they discovered our actual user numbers exceeded reported figures. Our expansion budget was based on projections that ignored seasonal variations, meaning we'd be short approximately $1.2 million by Q4. The new client acquisition costs were trending 340% above industry standards due to inefficient marketing spend. I pulled up spreadsheet after spreadsheet, each one revealing another layer of financial complexity that had been ignored or overlooked. Thomas watched in growing horror as I outlined risk after risk, each one potentially company-threatening if not addressed properly. The healthcare client portfolio alone represents $15 million in revenue, I explained, pointing to my analysis. But their payment cycles are extending, and we haven't adjusted our cash flow projections accordingly. We could face a liquidity crisis by November if 3 of them delay payments simultaneously. By the time we finished, Thomas looked like he'd aged 5 years. His usually confident demeanor had crumbled completely, replaced by the shell-shocked expression of someone who'd just realized how close they'd come to career suicide. How did you catch all of this? He asked, his voice hoarse from stress. It's what I do, Thomas. It's what I've always done. The difference is, now you're listening. I closed the folder and looked him directly in the eye. This is what adding value looks like. This is why I've spent 7 years staying late, working weekends, and catching problems before they become disasters. The board meeting went better than expected. Much better. I presented the issues with clear explanations, concrete solutions, and a detailed timeline for implementation. The board members, including CEO Amanda Foster, CFO Robert Kim, and 3 external directors, listened intently as I outlined each risk and its corresponding mitigation strategy. Ms. Watson, Amanda Foster interrupted during my presentation, how long have you been tracking these issues? Several weeks to several months, depending on the specific risk. I maintain ongoing analyses of all major financial indicators as part of my standard duties. And these analyses weren't included in our regular reports? I glanced at Thomas, who was studying his hands like they held the secrets of the universe. I wasn't included in the decision-making process for this quarter's major expenditures. The silence in that boardroom was deafening. You could have heard a pin drop on the mahogany conference table. Amanda Foster's expression shifted from curiosity to something much more serious. After the meeting, she pulled me aside in the hallway outside the boardroom. The afternoon sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows across the polished marble floors. Abigail, she said, her voice carrying the authority that came with building a $50 million company from scratch, I'm promoting you to Director of Financial Strategy. You'll report directly to me, and you'll have oversight of all budget meetings moving forward. Your new salary will reflect the true value of your contributions to this organization. The promotion came with a 40% salary increase, a corner office with those coveted floor-to-ceiling windows, and most importantly, the respect I'd been earning for 7 years but had never received. Thomas? He was reassigned to special projects, corporate speak for, "We're keeping you around until we figure out what to do with you." Sometimes the universe has a sense of humor, and sometimes that humor involves watching someone who questioned your value struggle to find their own. But here's the real lesson I learned: your value doesn't diminish because someone fails to see it. I spent years thinking I needed their validation to matter, checking my email obsessively for recognition, staying late hoping someone would notice my dedication. I remember one particularly painful evening, working until 10 p.m. on a presentation that would save the company $500,000, only to have Thomas take full credit the next morning. I went home that night questioning everything: my skills, my career choices, even my self-worth. The truth is, my expertise spoke for itself. I just needed to stop whispering and start speaking loudly enough for the right people to hear. 6 months later, Axiom Technologies posted its most profitable quarter in company history. The cost-saving measures I implemented saved us over $3 million. The risk mitigation strategies prevented at least 2 potential disasters that could have cost us major clients. And yes, I made sure everyone knew where those savings came from, not out of ego, but because recognition breeds more recognition. Here's something I didn't expect: other departments started coming to me proactively. The marketing team wanted my input on campaign budgets. HR asked me to review compensation packages for financial sustainability. Even the IT department requested my analysis before major system upgrades. Suddenly, I wasn't fighting for a seat at the table, I was the person everyone wanted to consult before making big decisions. The transformation was remarkable. Thomas's old streamlined meetings became detailed strategy sessions where my voice carried weight. I went from being excluded to being indispensable, and the shift happened almost overnight once people realized what they'd been missing. My new team consists of 4 junior analysts who actually listen when I speak, who value my experience, and who understand that attention to detail isn't just important, it's everything in our business. We've implemented new reporting procedures, enhanced risk assessment protocols, and created early warning systems that catch problems weeks before they become crises. The cloud tech contract? We renegotiated it, saving approximately $800,000 annually. The software licensing issues? Resolved with better terms and compliance procedures. The client payment delays? We implemented new collection strategies that improved cash flow by 23%. Now, I want to ask you something: have you ever been in a situation where your worth was questioned? Where you felt invisible despite your contributions? I'd love to hear your story in the comments below. Because the truth is, we've all been there at some point in our careers. The difference is how we choose to respond when our value is dismissed. Sometimes the best way to prove your value isn't to argue for it, it's to let your absence speak louder than your presence ever could. Sometimes you have to let people fail without you before they understand what you bring to the table. But here's the crucial part: you have to be ready to step back in when they realize their mistake. The key is doing it on your terms, not theirs. I learned that silence can be the most powerful negotiation tool you have. When Thomas came to me panicked and desperate, I held all the leverage because I'd been patient enough to let the situation unfold naturally. I didn't have to fight for respect, the circumstances demanded it for me. If this story resonated with you, hit that like button and subscribe for more tales of workplace triumph. Trust me when I say, this is just the beginning of what happens when you stop seeking validation and start demanding respect. Next week, I'll share the story of how I turned that 40% salary increase into something even bigger, and why you should never underestimate the power of knowing your worth. What would you have done in my situation? Would you have helped Thomas immediately, or would you have let him face the consequences of his decisions? Here's what I've realized since then: there's no single right answer. Some situations call for immediate action, others require strategic patience. The key is knowing which approach serves your long-term interests while maintaining your integrity. Let me know below, and remember, your expertise is your superpower. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. But also remember that superpowers are most effective when used strategically, not reactively. Sometimes the people who dismiss your value are the same ones who come running when everything falls apart. The question is, will you be there to catch them, or will you let them learn what it's like to fall without a safety net?